قبل 3 اشهر بحالنا تخلص القصه.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are your top stories for today. Police block roads ahead of a protest organized by the Youth Take movement in downtown Beirut. Prime Minister Tamam Salam chairs a meeting to follow up on the possible solutions for the waste management crisis. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warns that the involvement of Hezbollah and other Lebanese fighters in the war in Iraq and Yemen puts more dangers on Lebanon. And EU governments are set to agree to step up deportations of illegal immigrants among the hundreds of thousands who have failed to win asylum. Police have blocked a road ahead of a protest organized by the Youth-led coalition of groups in downtown Beirut. Workers erected concrete blocks and barbed wire near a Nahar building in anticipation of the protests. Workers and others who were inside downtown Beirut's premises at the time the barriers were erected were forced to climb over the blocks to exit. Security forces also heavily deployed in the area and diverted traffic to other routes. The main protest called on last week is set to kick off at 6 p.m. local time in Martyr Square, but We Want Accountability has called for its supporters to gather at 5 p.m. The actions are part of their ongoing campaign against the government and the political class over the failure to resolve the 2-month-long trash crisis. And still on the issue, Prime Minister Tamam Salam has chaired a meeting regarding the waste management crisis in presence of Interior Minister Nuhad al-Mashnouk and Agriculture Minister Akram Shayib. The meeting was held to follow up on the latest solution proposals to the implementation of the waste plan proposed by Shayib. The plan calls for the establishment of 2 sanitary landfills, one in the northern district of Akkad and another in the Masna area of the Bekaa Valley. In the wake of the meeting, the agriculture minister said he had briefed Salam and Mashnouk on the latest developments concerning the waste plan, adding that Mashnouk had also briefed the premier on the outcome of his latest contacts with Akkad officials. Several residents neighboring a sanitary landfill which is planned to open in the Akkad village of Srad have managed to prevent bulldozers from continuing work on the site. The national news agency says a protest tent erected on Aboudiya Junction in the northern district was still crowded with protesters who reject the establishment of the landfill and are preventing garbage trucks from it. A cabinet plan to wind down the prolonged and devastating trash crisis overcame a key obstacle on Tuesday, as Akkad mayors said they would not stand in the way of a new landfill being opened in Srad in order to ease the garbage pileup in Mount Lebanon and Beirut. However, civil society activists from the governorate are still opposed and have gathered under the campaign banner Akkad is not a dump. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has warned that the involvement of Hezbollah and other Lebanese fighters in the war in Iraq and Yemen puts more dangers on Lebanon. In his report to the Security Council on the implementation of Resolution 1559, Ban also said that the participation of Lebanese nationals in the conflict in Syria is in violation of Lebanon's dissociation policy and seriously destabilizes the security and stability of Lebanon. The UN chief urged the Lebanese government and the army to take the necessary measures to stop Hezbollah and other armed groups from possessing weapons in violation of 1559. Experts say Hezbollah has sent between 5,000 and 8,000 fighters to Syria to help the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. Ban also lauded the efforts exerted by the Lebanese army to confront extremist groups on the eastern border, mainly a Nusra Front and the Islamic State. He called for unity among the Lebanese in supporting the military, which he considers as the only legitimate institution in charge of defending the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia has fired cruise missiles at targets in Syria in a major display of military power, with warships in the Caspian Sea more than 1,200 kilometers away carrying out the attacks. Russia says it is targeting the Islamic State group, but at least some of its airstrikes have reportedly hit Western-backed armed group. This is the first news of Russia using its navy in its Syrian campaign since it began building up its military forces in the country. NATO says it is prepared to send troops to Turkey to defend its ally after violations of Turkish airspace by Russian jets bombing Syria, and Britain scolded Moscow for escalating a civil war that has already killed 250,000 people. Officials at the U.S.-led alliance are still smarting from Russia's weekend incursions into Turkey's airspace near northern Syria, and NATO defense ministers are meeting in Brussels with the agenda likely to be dominated by the Syrian crisis.
NATO is able and ready to defend all allies, including Turkey, against any threats. And one of the main reasons why we have increased the readiness, the preparedness of our forces, why we have doubled the size of the NATO response force, why we have established a very high readiness joint task force, why we have increased the efficiency of decision making, all of this is a response both to the challenges we see to the east, but also to the challenges we see to the south. My concern is that the Russians are not mainly targeting ISIS, but they are targeting other opposition groups, and they are supporting the regime. And I call on Russia to play a constructive and cooperative role in the fight against ISIS, not to continue to support the Assad regime, because to support the regime is not a constructive contribution to a peaceful and lasting political solution in Syria.
We'll be calling on Russia specifically to stop propping up the Assad regime, to use their influence constructively to stop Assad bombing his own civilians, and themselves to avoid the use of unguided munitions in areas that are not being controlled by ISIL.
And coming up next, FIFA President Sepp Blatter and his possible successor, UEFA Michel Platini, are provisionally suspended for 90 days. More details right next. Welcome back. An Israeli student has been stabbed and critically wounded in Jerusalem as tensions between Israelis and Palestinians continue to rise. The 25-year-old yeshiva student was stabbed in his upper body at Ammunition Hill in occupied East Jerusalem, in the fourth such incident to take place in a 24-hour period, according to local media reports. The alleged attacker, reportedly a 19-year-old Palestinian from East Jerusalem, was detained by police. Clashes have also erupted between Palestinian youths and Israeli soldiers at Tekoa in the West Bank. Groups of Palestinians threw stones at the soldiers, who responded with tear gas. Meanwhile, overnight in Tel Village near Nablus, the Israeli army raided houses and conducted searches and arrests. Moving on to Europe, EU governments are set to agree to step up deportations of illegal immigrants among the hundreds of thousands who have failed to win asylum as they try to cope with a surge in refugees from war-torn Syria. EU interior ministers meeting in Luxembourg were expected to agree, among other things, to back the detention of those who may abscond before expulsion and exert more pressure on African and other poor states, including via aid budgets, to make them accept the return of citizens refused entry to Europe. In the evening, they will be joined by EU foreign ministers and delegations from Balkan states, Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon for talks on stemming migrant flows that have plunged the bloc into crisis, dividing members over how to secure the EU's external borders and how to share responsibility for housing refugees. And across the Atlantic, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Jordan's Prince Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, has expressed concerns about Mexico's human rights record and called for soldiers to face questioning over the disappearance of 43 students feared massacred. The disappearance of the students on the night of September 26th in the southwestern city of Iguala has sent shockwaves through Mexico and the world. International experts have traveled to the scene of the crime and violence-ravaged Guerrero state, where they have cited deep flaws in the government's investigation and dismissed officials' claims that the victims were incinerated in a garbage dump.
Many of the issues raised by my predecessor 4 years ago remain of concern, and many of the people I have spoken to painted a very bleak and consistent picture of a society that is racked by high levels of insecurity, disappearances and killings, continuing harassment of human rights defenders and journalists, violence against women, and terrible abuses of migrants and refugees transiting the country on their way to the United States. It is important that the government acts decisively on the IGIE's recommendations, including its insistence that the authorities reverse their decision not to allow experts to interview members of the 27th Battalion, Infantry Battalion, who were allegedly present on the scene when some of the attacks took place. Instead of shooting the messenger, let us focus on the message. We are all on your side. We all want to assist Mexico. Ignoring what is happening to this great country is not an option for us, and it should not be an option for the country's elected politicians and state officials whose responsibility is to protect the country's citizens as well as the migrants and refugees on its territory.
FIFA President Sepp Blatter and his possible successor, UEFA Michel Platini, have been provisionally suspended for 90 days by the global football body's ethics committee. The committee also handed out a 90-day suspension to Jerome Valcke, FIFA Secretary General, who had already been put on leave by the football body. Chung Moong-joon, former FIFA Vice President, got a ban for 6 years and a fine of 100,000 Swiss francs. FIFA's ethics committee said in a statement that the grounds for these decisions are the investigations that are being carried out by the investigatory chamber of the ethics committee. Lebanon has always been a blank area on the map of sports climbing, but Austrian superstar climber David Lama recently changed this. With the help of local climber Jad Khouri, he did a first ascent of unique beauty and highest difficulties, Batara Gorge sinkhole near Tanurin in North Lebanon, after concentrating on mountaineering projects such as Cerro Torre, Mashar Bram or Moses Tooth in previous years. The former multiple climbing world champion and World Cup winner has returned to sport climbing this year. Apart from some routes in the Alps and the USA, his most spectacular trip led him to the Middle East and Batara Gorge. Steve-O Glover, stunt performing star of the Jackass movies, pleaded no contest to charges he illegally climbed a Los Angeles construction crane and set off fireworks to protest against SeaWorld. A judge sentenced Steve-O, who posted a video online of his August 9 stunt in Hollywood, to 30 days in jail and 3 years of probation. Steve-O, who was admitted struggling at times with drug abuse and mental illness, focused his ire on SeaWorld after the 2013 release of the Blackfish documentary that decried the theme park's practice of keeping orcas in captivity and making them perform, and has called for the orcas to be freed. He is scheduled to turn himself in on December 9th to start serving his jail sentence. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. Police block roads ahead of a protest organized by the U-Stink movement in downtown Beirut. Prime Minister Tamam Slam chairs a meeting to follow up on the possible solutions for the waste management crisis. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warns that the involvement of Hezbollah and other Lebanese fighters in the war in Iraq and Yemen puts more dangers on Lebanon. And EU governments are set to agree to step up deportations of illegal immigrants among the hundreds of thousands who have failed to win asylum. That's it from me for today. Yumna Naufal will be here for tomorrow's newscast. Tune in.
سنة و2 أشهر حلت على 13